Hello, everyone. Hi, welcome to Approaching the Redesigned Carnegie Classifications. How are you building your NSSE 2026 comparison groups? We're happy you're here. I'm Jillian Kinsey, and I'm joined by two colleagues, Bob Gagne and Rick Schaup, who are going to help us work through this puzzle today. We're glad you could join us, and we really hope that this can be a little bit interactive. You'll notice that this is not a in the can webinar thing where you can't see who else is in the space. You'll start to see people's images, or at least what I see a lot of right now are initials popping up. And that makes me wonder if we actually have not enabled cameras for our participants. So we do hope to make this a little bit more interactive, and are really
I see a few cameras, Jillian.
Oh, wait. Oh, okay. Look at, oh, I see. Thank you, Patrice. Oh, yay. Okay. So that was, I suppose that should be an invitation. I should have reframed what I made as a statement. We're going to invite you to turn your camera on if you're inclined. It's no pressure to turn it on, but we really would like to build a little bit more community in this space, and that will help. I realize you can't see everybody depending on what display you're using, but please, offer it, and we'll also invite you at some point to open your mics as well. I won't ask you to try that right now, but please at least have camera on if you can or inclined. I'll also encourage you to use the chat to introduce yourself. And if you want to, let somebody else know that you're here from, meet other people in your state or in perhaps your system, please go ahead and do that now. We have a nice group assembled today of NSSE 2026 participants. So if you want to get to know who else is in the batch of participants, feel free to do that. I'm going to get started, though, because we really want to cover a lot of ground in our short time with you today. And, first, Rick, actually, I'm going to ask you to go back because I do want to, again, acknowledge who else is in the room. I mentioned Rick and Bob Gagne, and I should have also mentioned Ryan Lenz, Ryan is going to be more of our technical assistant here today, working with us. And I just want to acknowledge them as co-presenters today. So we'll all be working to deliver this section, this topic today. And it's a beautiful day in Bloomington, where we're based at Indiana University, and it's Little Five weekend. If you don't know anything about Little Five, I invite you to Google it. It's quite an exciting weekend here. But we have a lot to talk about for NSSE 2026. We are about ready to close up the administration. Most of you know that your surveys are closing very soon. Many of you have completed your total administration even as long as a month ago. But we are really at that key stage where you are invited to customize. And it's a key feature of the NSSE project. This customization is really a centerpiece of the work we do. And it really, comparison groups matter a lot. And we want to really support you in your use of this functionality with our project. Custom groups allow you to do a lot of things. You can obviously compare your results with relevant institutions. In fact, up to 3 different groupings of institutions. It can help you build meaningfulness and actionability into your use of results. And the other thing I really like about the comparison group options that we help you design, is that you can really start to tailor those groups so that your results mean something given what you're trying to examine about your students and their experience. For example, if you're really trying to understand a particular dimension of the undergraduate experience, like student-faculty interaction or high-impact practices, you could identify institutions that have those same kind of practices in mind that are either your peers or maybe your aspirational peers, and align your results with them in a comparison group. You can also just take the more general comparison group value, where comparisons support planning, the purpose of the whole role of benchmarking and the work that we're doing is really facilitated by making good comparison group choices. So that's what we're trying to allow you to do. And we know that NSSE results mean a lot more when you can customize. It's always that question that people will take a look at the results and say, oh, here's our engagement indicator score. And the first thing that people will say is, well, compared to what? What does that mean? What does a score of 48 mean? Or what does being at an 80% evaluation level mean? So the compared to what question is an important one. And I like to think about lots of different ways that people can do comparisons. And you can certainly, I really advocate comparison to your own work, but you really want to identify what's motivating your action and your work. So do you have to customize? No, you don't. Of course you don't. You can just let us display the defaults for you, and you can just be fine with that. But should you customize these groups to the maximum advantage? We think yes. So this is the encouragement part. So I know some of you have some experience doing this work. And actually, Rick, before we get to this slide, I would like Ryan to launch a little poll. And Ryan, if you wouldn't mind launching this, and if you could kind of let us know who's in the room here, what's your experience with customizing groups with NSSE? I know some of you might have been around for NSSE, but how many of you have really customized? And how would you classify yourself? Are you a veteran? Would you identify yourself as a proficient? Maybe at least 2 times you've done this customization process. Or are you really kind of a novice, still learning how to do this? Maybe you've sort of done it or watched somebody else do it. Or is this your total first time? We'd love to know where you are in this. And then we'll see how the results play out here. I think you can see it in the chat, or at least it's appearing on my screen. It's the first time I've used Teams polls, actually, so I wasn't sure how this would appear. So, wow, okay, so if this is reflective, we have a lot of new people in our group here today. Maybe not surprising, given the fact that a lot of things have changed, and we really pitched this webinar as one that would help people understand this work. So maybe not surprising, but it shows that we can maybe only rely on a few veterans here who can really advise us. So let's just treat this as a total learning experience for everybody. And I really want to open us up and say, in this case, all questions are appropriate. There is no shame in asking a question that you might think you should know. So please do ask. And again, special invitation to the people who would consider themselves novices or newbies to ask questions. So thank you for responding to this poll. It gives us a good sense of who's here. So now I think I'm going to keep going on to the next slide, Rick, now, if you wouldn't mind, because there is a real path to comparison group work. And this is my new slogan: your institution isn't like all the others. Your comparison group shouldn't be either. So really, again, the invitation, the strong urging and invitation to customize as much as you can. And I want to suggest that there are really kind of 4 stop-offs or thought moments as you're going down the path to customization. And the first is being a little bit more thoughtful at the outset about what do you want to learn from your results. And that's where you enter the comparison conversation. What are you trying to learn? Is this about leveraging action on a dimension, a thorny, difficult issue at your campus? Is this really about propping folks up for the good practice at the institution? Or is it really about giving yourself some really hard baseline information about the quality of the undergraduate program, maybe in preparation for an accreditation review, or maybe to evaluate a new program that you have? You really want to identify the purpose of your comparison. What are your comparison group needs? And you could really have up to 3 distinct needs given our comparison group options. The second stop, I think, is the thought of which grouping. Do you want to look back at what you've done before, like prior year trends, or are you really seeking current year really thinking about what's the immediate context. And that might influence whether you're going to focus your attention on, I really just want current groupings. I want institutions that might be new to us, that might represent where we're headed as an institution, or you're really trying to do a little bit more reflection on where you've come. And if it's more about trends, then you might want to really scan the prior year participants to see, okay, we want some consistency in our groups because we're really trying to understand ourselves in our development. But if you're just trying to say, boy, we got a lot of baseline, let's try and get going, then the immediate context, the current year might really serve your purpose. The other dimension is about the variety of custom groups that you can create. You can customize up to 3 groups with NSSE, and again, I think you could identify those groups based on the goal that you hope they serve. I know we get really caught up in we always compare ourselves to other institutions that are, advanced to the Sweet 16 basketball champ. That's who we compare ourselves to. And if that's really means something to your campus, by all means, go for it. But how is that serving the goals that you have for what your comparison groups are supposed to do for you? So I invite you to think about that. The last one is more of if you have either consortium or modules that you've added to the survey, you get more opportunity to choose, and you can create a different group entirely for those modules. So if you chose academic advising, maybe you want to create a slightly tailored group that might be pretty different than the other groups you've chosen for your core survey, just because you really want to focus on a particular style or approach to delivering advising. So lots of comparison thoughtfulness here that you can take on this path. All right, so that's a broad overview. Now we sort of want to move into the technical elements of it. Comparison groups are created through what we call the NSSE report form. And I know you've all been invited to participate, to open it up and see how it's arranged. And for those of you who already, dug in and opened your report form, it can be pretty overwhelming. It might look not so awesome or overwhelming at first, but the minute you start to open up a few of those boxes, you get a display of a whole bunch of options, and it can be a little bit scary. So I'm going to just say, try not to be overwhelmed, really be thoughtful as you get into it, because there's a lot of creativity opportunity here. You can really spend a little time thinking about the list of institutions. So as you click on some of those boxes, seeing the individual institutions on a list might be a very reasonable way to just check, you're clicking institutions. These are the ones I want in our first comp group. These are the ones I want in our second. These are the ones I want in our third. The other way is to do a little bit more filtering based on characteristics. And by all means, you could see, well, what do the defaults look like if I choose it? I'd look at that at least to see if that serves your purpose. That might help you quickly get to a comparison group. But you might also evaluate it and say, nah, that's not really going to serve our purposes. So you might really want to select more on your own characteristics. The last dimension that's shown here is selecting institutions based on characteristics, where you start with what you're thinking about, and then you can remove the ones that you think, nah, that one's not going to fly with our deans. They're going to immediately be suspicious of that institution being on the list. So I don't want to have that on the list. And you can remove particular institutions. So a lot of creativity here. I invite you to, paint it and color it however you like. Most important thing is there are opportunities to edit your selection. So please don't think you have to get this right on the first try. Once you click submit, that it's done. You can edit your selections anytime before the report form closes. We state a May 1 deadline, but I know Rick has been very generous when people need more time. And, we do allow a little, I know you're never supposed to say this, but there's a little cushion in here to allow people to make some last minute changes or to realize, I made a mistake. I need to fix this. So But you really do want to get these set as much as you can by May 1. All right, so that's kind of the how they're created. And now what we want to do is just quickly reacquaint you perhaps with some resources. So we've spent a lot of time creating resources, and in fact, we've just updated them this year, and credit to Allison Birch-Clorenz and Maya Hurtado and Rick for recrafting all of our selecting comparison groups, a web page that I think is much more accessible now. And I know Ryan just dropped some of these links, the resources page and the video walkthroughs into the chat, which is wonderful. But I want to distinguish two forms of tutorials that we have. The first on my left of the screen is this overview video that I think is a really helpful way to think about selecting comparison groups. It's something you can watch with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and kind of just really settle in. It's 8 minutes and 50 seconds. I think it's worth a watch, particularly if you have some new people who you want to involve in the comparison group selection. Or if you're new, I really commend this really gentle, thoughtful, how do you think about comparison group video. The ones that are a part of the report form tutorial are really technical, step-by-step, like your more traditional YouTube, how do I fix the plumbing in my bathroom kind of video, where it's like, wow, okay, I got to watch this. I got to be able to pause it. I have to be able to act in between the instructions. Those you definitely want to sit down at your desk, particularly if you're watching parts 4 through 7. Rick chunked this out into reasonable doses, but you'll want to figure out which one you want to watch. Each are very short, but you'll want to watch it and have all of your tools, whether that's a wrench or, whatever it is, right available there for you. Watch when you're ready to complete the form, and then prepare some sort of appropriate adult beverage to have after you've done all this, because you're going to deserve it. Yeah, you will deserve it. So that's the resources that we've prepared for you. And if you haven't looked at them in the last 4 days, just be aware they're new. So I invite you to, circle back to them if you can. Okay, now you can move on, Rick. Thank you. Okay, so last bit, perhaps from me, there are some new things for comparison groups. The big elephant in the room, the one that we've really trying to draw you into this presentation with, is the Carnegie reclassification. So the redesigned Carnegie is the major change in this work. And I was commenting to Bob and Rick and Ryan earlier that actually, interestingly enough, this webinar that we're doing today on April 24th, 2026 is exactly a year from when the Carnegie announced the redesigned classification schema. They announced it on April 24th, 2025. So how serendipitous of us to have this same date. So we have made it possible. We've always had 3 customization groups possible for you, but really the new Carnegie, the redesigned Carnegie, makes this much different. And the phasing out of Carnegie 2021 classifications, the current, or the old, I should say really now the old Carnegies, are no longer in play. You could recreate them to the degree that you can, and I know several of you asked that in the questions coming into this webinar. Is it possible to essentially recreate those or to maintain longitudinal consistency in your selections? You can, but you'll have to do it essentially by hand picking. So that's the challenge in this work. So it doesn't exist anymore. So, okay, Rick, oh my gosh, look at this. Wow, I'm seeing the whole scary list. All right, so let me go to one thing first before Rick shows a scary list. I'm going to make one quick little slide reference here that if you can go to the next one, Rick, here's my sense of the Carnegie change. All right. So for those of you who may have been around in the 1980s, the Carnegie, you remember when Coke changed from its Coke to New Coke, and how public outcry caused them to go back to what's now called Classic Coke. And I don't think we're going to have a replication of that scenario or that marketing challenge, but it's really important to acknowledge that Carnegie really has been reset in significant ways. It's still serving its fundamental purpose of organizing and recategorizing higher ed institutions, but it is much more focused on how institutions serve students. So it's much more student-oriented, student-centered classification schema, particularly in the student access and earnings classification. So it's really taking student-centeredness and making that a lens for the classification system. It's also providing a lot more nuance now with 31 groupings. So it's got the three categories: institutional classifications, the student-centered, and then the research designation. And then within that, there are 31 groupings. So it is a major reset. And I'm going to turn it, I think, to Bob now, and we'll see if we can do the next kind of fun little exercise.
That's right. Thanks, Jillian. Well, hi, everybody. It's a beautiful day here in Bloomington, Indiana, and we have Little Five weekend, which is fun. Yeah, as Jillian suggested or talked about, the Carnegie classification is really quite substantial, and that's why we decided to kind of create this discussion so that we can help institutions think through their comparison groups again. My first question is to run a poll. Ryan, why don't you go ahead? I want to get a general sense of your take on the new Carnegie classification. From what you've seen, do you believe it's a positive change? Or are you sort of against it? Do you think it's a negative change, perhaps how the new Coke fared ultimately? Or are you really uncertain? So why don't you go ahead and just give us your response on this poll, and we'll see how people are thinking about this Carnegie reclassification. Yeah, as we expected, it looks like the majority are going to be uncertain about it, right? There's still a lot of questions to be seen. The good thing is that I believe the Carnegie website has very good information and resources about it. So we, of course, don't need to replicate that here with NSSE, but we wanted to talk about it specifically in the context of creating your comparison groups and for benchmarking. And so, as Jillian mentioned, it's a pretty substantial change. They're focusing more on the kind of academic experience students are having, as opposed to the highest degree offered by the institution. Now they're focusing more perhaps on the broader general academic focus of the institution. I believe that the classification was done very thoughtfully, and I'm hoping that it has lasting benefits for everyone. But of course, when you have to make a change, it's difficult, and especially for those of you who are maybe tracking longitudinal results and wanted to track against a very similar comparison group over time, that's when these trade-offs are being made. So hopefully you can find some good in this, but also if you really do need to track, we're providing a way to do that. Like Jillian mentioned, there are three different kinds of classifications. The institutional classification is sort of their most standard one. It's no longer called the basic classification. It's completely renamed because it's a completely new animal. It uses dimensions like size, award focus, and undergraduate and graduate program mix to create new categories. And what we're going to do is show you a diagram in a second that really shows you how different the new classification is based on the 2021 classification. And so the bottom line, and when you see the diagrams that we're about to show, you'll see that there's really no one-to-one or simple correlation between the old and the new classifications, which kind of puts you in the hot seat to really think through your institutional type, your designations now. So as Rick is showing now, this is what's called a Sankey chart. On the left are the groupings as of the 2021 Carnegie classification. And on the right side are the groupings for the institutional classification. And right away, you see that there are many more categories than there were in sort of the basic classification. And here we're only talking about NSSE participating institutions, not all institutions. So of course, those community colleges and other small institutions that don't participate in NSSE are not included here. So we're really talking about the bachelor's granting and above types of institutions. So Rick, if you were to select just to say the master's college and universities large, that yellow category, oops, it just went AWOL. Let's see if you can get it back.
Give me a quick second, Bob. I'll get it back up.
Okay, sure. So what we're going to show is that, for example, if you were a master's institution, you can see it here on the image. This is not the live Sankey chart. You can see how the yellow lines trace through to many different kinds of classifications in the new scheme. So that, there's as many as, I don't know, 10 or 12 or 15 different categories that were originally categorized as the master's college and university's larger programs. So this is what we say was when we say that there really isn't a good correlation between the old Carnegie and the new Carnegie. It's the same for any one of those categories that you clicked on. The only one that I would say is perhaps mostly consistent, maybe 60% consistent, are the baccalaureate arts and sciences. Rick, click on that baccalaureate arts and sciences down there. You can see that there is a large swath of those institutions that stayed in what you would call the special focus arts and sciences group, but still many of them did divert to other categories throughout there. But in general, what we're seeing is that there isn't a one-to-one. If you clicked on one of the categories on the right, Rick, you can kind of make the same point. Any one of those categories were sourced from many different, of the older Carnegie types. So the point is made, and you can go onto our website and play with this if you want. It's really just a visual to show you that there's not much correlation between the two categories. You could perhaps, use it to inform your changes, or if your senior leaders are questioning, the comparison groups and why it's so different, you can, refer them to the Sankey chart that we just showed you, that there isn't an easy one-to-one comparison. So that's all we wanted to point out to you. Now, I wanted to mention one thing, and Jillian mentioned it, and Rick showed you the Excel charts. If you still want to use the 2021 basic classification, we are making those variables available to you, but it's in an Excel sheet that you have to download. It's available by download through the NSSE report form. But then, you can go in there and you can find the category that you want by filtering those tables. And then I believe, unfortunately, the only way then to apply it to the report form is to select those institutions by name. So you need to select them one at a time. So you can use the 2021 by referring to this Excel spreadsheet and then selecting institutions by name in the report form. And if you have trouble with that, we can, of course, help you with that as we go along. Okay? So I believe that's the end of my mention. If there are any more questions about the Carnegie migration or Carnegie, we can answer them in chat. Rick's going to continue on with more information about the report form itself, I believe.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Jillian. And hello, everyone from still sunny, still wonderful Connecticut. As Bob, I believe, found out this weekend, the New England weather is a little bit more unstable than Indiana. And that we swung from a high of 80s before his trip to down in the 30s and 40s for the trip to Rhode Island. So my apologies for that. Wish I was in town for the Little Five. So as a callback to what Jillian was talking about. So Jillian talked about a diversity of goals, a diversity of paths you can take to build your comparison groups. And so what we've done is we were aware of who signed on for the webinar, and we captured some really good examples. So some of this might look familiar to you. Somebody's like, hey, wait a second, I use that same label. We intentionally drew some of these examples, these labels and uses from people that are potentially in the room right now. So we thank you for that. And we really, again, we want to emphasize that there's a variety of different paths you can take to customize your comparison groups. Or if the defaults speak to what you're looking for as far as a strategy, you can start with those defaults and go from there. So for example, we have some users that have selected specifically from a list of all institutions. They went in and they identified, here are my iPads peers. Here's my standard iPads peers. Let me click on these. And you can see a little picture down below of what they did. They just clicked on specific institutions. My top cancel schools, my standard benchmark group, aspirants, members of AAU, or US News top 100. So that would be an aspirant group. So in those cases, they selected from a list. But then we also see users that used criteria to build their comparison groups. So they went in and said, okay, this is going to be instead of like a specific institutions in mind, I want a particular type of institution that I want to focus on. So let me pull, for example, Carnegie Research, CNU, R1 Carnegie peers, midsize in the new SAEC opportunity colleges and universities, which is a fantastic example of using criteria. R2 schools and greater than 10K enrollment. This is all available to you. All these criteria are available to you in the report form, as you'll see. And then small private baccalaureate or rural small. And so again, this picture down below the slide is how it kind of the mechanics of it. When you're within the form, again, we're not going to spend time on this today, but there is a tutorial to show you how to do this. There's a tutorial specific to picking by criteria. And so it'll show you that here's your drop-down menus, here's your options for doing it. And as Bob mentioned, we have phased out, understandably, the 2021 within the form mechanics. So what you're going to be looking at is the 2025 Carnegie. But again, you're going to be able to start with those criteria and then go from there. Like you can pick by the criteria, take out outliers, take out people that institutions you feel aren't like you, and go from there. And then, as I mentioned, there's also a path where you would start with retaining your default. So some individuals chose public institutions within the region or Canada. There's a lot of Canadian participants this year. So that's perfectly great example of, yes, I want to compare myself against other Canadian institutions, people within my default Carnegie class, or hey, you know, I want a group that is all of NSSE or all of NSSE 2025 and 26. And then finally, some of you are in consortia. And so you might say that consortia is a really good default comparison group for one of your comparison groups. Again, there's it may be, there's really no downside to one path or the other, but it is, as Jillian mentioned, it's good to have maybe like to have a diversity of paths. So instead of taking all three defaults, customize at least one of your group to a very select small group of institutions that are really like you, that you see as your peers. And then you can still take a default of all institutions and see how that would pan out as well.
I just want to reiterate, Rick, that on the previous page, and it'll appear again on this one, is these are the labels that you get to decide. So we're not, these are not labels that we've created. These are labels that, you know, the only one that we've probably created or contributed to is all NSSE and NSSE 2025 and 2026. The rest of them are all labels that you self-create when you name your groups. So, you know, I don't know what the top cancel schools are, but somebody, that means something to somebody here in this space. So very interesting lists here.
And yes, those are actual 2026 labels that were used for comparison groups. And then again, continuing the examples of comparison groups, that these are very specific to individuals that chose a particular path that involved using the redesigned 2025 Carnegie classifications. So for example, one person said, okay, let me combine my list of NCES and Carnegie criteria. So they used that to pick a specific list of institutions from a list. But then another person said, okay, give me all public universities of a similar size, but also using the mixed baccalaureate Carnegie classification that they'd been defined from. So their mixed baccalaureate Carnegie might have been their default, but they said within that default, I don't feel private institutions are best representative of what I'm looking to compare myself against. So just give me public within that. So that was a customization option. And then, there's, I don't want to read the slide back to you. This will be available, of course, afterwards. But there's a wide sway of folks who, again, some of you may be in the room, and I thank you for the thoughtful approach you took to your comparison group and using the 2025 classifications if you are in the room. And down below, so at the top, those are notes. So when you create your comparison groups, you'll also be able to add a comment to how you did it. So those first 4 points on this slide are notes individuals left to themselves about how they built their group. And then down below, this is my notes about what individuals did. You can see like one person used their institutional classification. So they said, okay, give me all mixed undergraduate, graduate, doctoral, large. But then another person said, all right, I'm going to start with my institutional classification, but also within that, I want also anybody in the new SAEC higher access medium learning. So it's a subset of their default there. And we've saw a number of individuals that have used the new research activity designation, which used to be it used to be very specific to the top 3 options with the 2021 doctoral classification. And it's worth noting that the research activity designation, whereas most people, all of you are going to have one of the new 2025 institutional classifications and an SEEC classification, there's going to be a large number of not applicables for the research activity designation. So that may not apply to you if that's not, if the Carnegie Foundation didn't rate your institution in that regard. The final example was somebody that used the research activity designation of high spending doctoral production, but also used I laugh every time I see it. It's the ALF. I don't know however many of you remember that show from the 80s. There's an ALF rating of undergraduate, the award level focus, if you will, of undergraduate, graduate, doctoral, and public. So these are actual examples of individuals, hopefully in the room, that have used the new Carnegie 2025 classifications. Do you see your choices of labels in these examples, and which labels would you want to know more about? This is just food for thought. Again, we've provided some resources you can use to get your get oriented to the new Carnegie classifications. We're not the experts in that realm. They are. They have a very useful website. It's very robust. It gives information about the methodology, how they built out the new classifications, the data they use to determine your classifications, and press releases. I would encourage you to take a look at that before you use the new classifications to build your NSSE 2026 comparison groups.
Excellent. Okay, so all right, we told you that we wanted to spend a little time being a little more interactive. It may not be as much time as I originally planned, but we would love to hear your ideas or questions that you have. Please feel free to either add them to the chat or raise your hand, and we will invite you to share verbally what you're thinking of. I did reach out to several people in advance of this webinar. If you were kind enough to say that you might be willing to share your approach to this, I would love for you to, let me know you're here or just start talking. That would be great. I won't call you out specifically, just perhaps you've changed her mind. So I don't want to be forcing anyone, but a few folks allowed me to what I think I described as voluntarily coerce them into sharing. But if you are not one of the ones who voluntarily were coerced and have something to say now or have a question, we would love to hear from you. We really want this to be a little bit more open for learning.
Jillian, I'm going to jump out. I see that there's a question in the chat right now, so I'll answer that.
Yeah.
Is anyone using the new SAEC classification, or could use that in combination with the institutional classification? Yes, you can use those together, but it will be one thing to be aware of when you're using within the report form is that you're clicking on one option, so you'll get your institutional classification, but then you can also click on SAEC options, but it's an and logic there, so it's always like a subset. It's going to be if you click on the SEC and an INS, it's going to be the SEC that's a subset of that institutional classification. And it's also worth noting that the SEC and the RAD, the research activity designation, are not 31 categories. Those are a much smaller group. So the research activity designation is 3 options, and then the SEC is 6, and so it's a much smaller group. So if you find that more useful, it might be a better way for you to find a larger group to start with. And Bob also indicated that the pillars or the dimensions of the institutional classification being size, award level, focus, and I forget the third, fourth are off the top of my head, but those are offered as discrete fields too. So if you want to deconstruct your institutional classification to focus more on, okay, size is more important to me within my institutional classification, that's available for you for selection as well.
All right, so I know somebody's warmed up and ready now. What are you thinking about? What's on your mind? Shannon, yay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Shannon Helfenstein from Kent State University. You guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So this is my 3rd time of selecting or going through the NSSE administration. And so I will be honest, we're not one of those that gets very creative with our comparison groups very often. But one thing, let's see, 3 years ago, we were excited because we were finally recognized as an R1 university. And so we were like, yay, we're in that top group now. And then, then this year that wasn't, so the Carnegie focus changed. And I'm like, okay. And then the default that, you guys had set up. And then because then this is something maybe just a helpful tip for others. Like I went back and I still had my list of my comparison group from 23 and then downloaded what was the default for the main Carnegie class. And it was drastically different, I would say. And then I also, started playing with the filters, and then I downloaded just the very high research kind of back to the R1, which includes multiple sizes. And I will say also, I will be transparent. I asked Copilot to help me with some comparisons once I was in Excel, comparing like the two years. And so I think in the end, we're probably going to go with the which, you can see, I did also put a plug, that Sankey visualization. Oh, that was great, because I really hadn't, looked into this, the new classifications until I needed to here. And so that was a nice visual. So appreciate whoever made that. So I think we're probably going to go with essentially the old R1. And so leadership was okay with that. Then I guess one other thing I will point out then more we did 2 topical modules. Because you'll see, because we ended up being go back to that Sankey, we're now in professions. We're not in that mixed group, so maybe we're not as elite as we'd like to be at Kent State. But but that's kind of where we're happy with the R1, and so it's why leadership wanted to stay with that. Going with topical modules, that is where we are kind of debating whether we want to maybe just look at our regional peers. Because the topical module is the career and workforce readiness. And so it might make sense to go with that, that kind of what the defaults more, the mission driven student success. We're at the, high admissions, medium earnings, or something like that. So we're debating right now between that and maybe our Great Lakes peers, thinking like local regional job competition. So, and then for another example, then we're also looking at the civic engagement, and someone in our student life, they had requested it. And so I gave them the list, and then they just went through, there's like 39 to pick from there. And I said, hey, you can pick as many as 39, or you can just pick as few as 5. And then he came back with me and just created his own. And so I'll just select, but he has like some aspirational, like 5 aspirational, some what he's calling secondary public peers. And then he says closest functional peers. So in the end, they'll have about 15 out of 39 to select there. So that's our process, at least. Hopefully that's helpful.
And
Wow.
I'm glad you mentioned that too. The reason we provide that Excel download is also to kind of give the feed, but also to provide a platform that you can share on your campus too, as you're having these conversations. So that individual you're working with, you could show that Excel file with them and say, here's who you have to pick from and here's their classifications.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shannon. I really appreciate that you actually shared it with some folks in student life. That's excellent. Thank you. All right, Jessica, is that a question? Are you ready to share?
I'm ready to share.
Yeah? Okay.
So I'm Jessica. I'm from Temple University. This is my first time with NSSE administration, but Temple's been doing it for a while, and luckily I had a lot of people to help coach me on my team. So for this year, for 2026, we went with the new designation for R1 of the very high spending and such, whatever its full title is, instead of kind of like piecemealing the former classification. And then we also decided to go with, last year we joined the University Innovation Alliance. So we are going to be compared to those schools as well. And then the Association of American Universities. So we often kind of compare ourselves with those two. So very happy to be able to customize those. For modules, we just went with institutions who also chose those modules, which were, we didn't get creative, but we went with academic advising and like career and workforce preparedness. So if anyone else is administering those, we're happy to see your results too. In our last administration, I think we got a little bit more creative. So we do an incoming student survey, and on that it asks, if you applied to other schools, what were those other schools and were you accepted to them? So we went through that list and we picked the schools that our students were applying to too. That way we can kind of see what our different groups are looking for and kind of just see where we're at amongst everyone. We also, in our last administration, our last administration was 2023, so we did our Carnegie peers then, and then we also did public city large too, because we are a large school in a city in Philadelphia. So very excited to be here and to be a part of NSSE this year.
Thank you, Jessica. That's excellent. I love the thinking that you've put into taking advantage of the Innovation Alliance group, because that's meaningful to people on your campus. Somebody got you involved in that. So having some comparison groups to say, okay, here's how we're doing, is a great leverage point. So I think that's an excellent way to think about this and approach to doing it. The other thing, I think your comment about modules is a very reasonable one. These are other institutions that also are interested in that topic. So by that very nature, they are already comparators just by being a part of electing that module. So they must have an interest in it. We didn't force it on anybody. So that's great. Good choices. Excellent. Anybody else have a thought or want to volunteer with how they're approaching or get some feedback on what they're thinking? Okay, I see some good chat here. We're going to be quiet here. We don't have to talk through the whole thing here. Anybody else? All right, we can keep talking, but I want to leave space. So overall, our approach to this is to take advantage. And thank you. Is it the accent is going to get me?
Yeah, it's
Cedric?
Cedric's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
just Cedric. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. I'm Cedric from Sherbrooke University.
Yeah,
I was just
Canadian
wondering.
friends.
Yeah, Canadian, francophone Canadian. So that's something. Now, I was just wondering, with the Carnegie classification, is this something that only exists for U.S. institutions?
It does.
Okay, so
does.
if we were to compare our institution with U.S. institution, we would have to, I don't know, work our way to see how our programs fit into each category.
Yeah, it's a really curious thing, and I don't know if there are any other Canadians on. I know there are some other Canadians on this webinar today who might be able to weigh in, but we might want to have a separate conversation to see some ways to make this applicable. I'm going to probably direct you first to the Carnegie Classifications page because we're not the source of the content in that way.
Okay.
But I think if you dug a little bit into the Carnegie groupings and the methodology that they used to assign different categories and classifications, you might be able to figure some things out.
Oh, okay.
They're very specific on their website and the thresholds they use for certain factors that led to how people got their institutional classification, their SAEC and the RAD. And so you could maybe even reverse engineer what they did in a sense, given your own institution's information to get to that point. I also know that a number of Canadian institutions use the Maclean's list as a guide. And so you're welcome to use that as well. The Carnegie classifications are specific to U.S. institutions, though. So when you go into your report form and look at all the other Canadians, the Carnegie classification values are going to say not applicable.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
We just don't have it. Sorry.
But I think I'm going to offer to Cedric the same thing and other Canadian institutions on here that I'll offer to all of you. If you want to talk through any of your ideas or thoughts you're having on this or trepidations, please give us a call. We're happy to consult with you on these things. I always feel like we're at the telethon and nobody's calling us, and we would love to get your call. So, we don't get enough interaction, as far as I'm concerned, with our users in the way that I would think we could all benefit from. So please don't think you're bothering us or that we don't have time for it. It's really fundamental to the work we're trying to do here. We want to help guide your practice and learn from you in the process. So please reach out. You have our email addresses. You can say, Bob, I was on that webinar with you and I really want to talk more about where our Carnegie classification migrated and how we can use that. So please do that. All right, I'm going to continue to scan a couple of thoughts. If you were not monitoring the chat, I'll lift up two things that I see from the chat. One is interest in that Excel sheet that Rick showed earlier that is downloadable from the report form, the actual site. So this form that Rick's displaying right now is available on the report form itself, and you can just download it from that. And yeah, so he's going to give you an example. So that, I would download it and just save it somewhere just so you have it, because I think it's a great reference anyway for this work. And as Rick said, you can share it with others. So just to remind everybody about that resource.
Hey, Rick, could you just drop that link right into the chat right now to the Excel download? Are you able to do that?
It requires the login to the interface.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
It does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah,
we also
that's
have
it's a good task to encourage people to go to the report form.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid of the report form. Yeah.
We also have on our website the participating institution search feature that is available. That you can do something similar. You can get a list of institutions that participate in NSSE. It's not going to allow you the great detail that the report form allows you, but use those together.
Yes, and anything else in the chat that we want to provide any sort of overview? I know some of you indicated some interest in the research activity designation. And, again, we're not here to explain Carnegie classifications, but if you have not seen Mushtaq Gunja and Sarah Gast present on the Carnegie classification, I would encourage you to find one of their webinars or watch what they've presented. It's really quite, they're masterful in how they explain it, and have really, I think, done a lot to expand the classifications. But I know some of you are interested in that research activity designation. And it's true that not everybody has a research activity designation. So, that's, you may want to look at that on your own to see why, or to understand what makes that the case. But that is a fact. Yeah, and the only other thing I see in the chat that I'll just amplify is, for anyone who has past NSSE data, all of your comparison group lists are included in your past institutional report packages. If you just want to download, that list and then choose those same institutions by hand, that's a way to maintain that consistency in groupings. You can completely ignore the new Carnegie classifications, or don't use any of that, and just maintain that consistency if that's important to you.
And those reports will also have your notes that you provided, the comments, notes, labels, details on who was included in those lists. So you can replicate as much possible. The same exact institutions won't be participating this year, but you can see, like, if you use criteria, what criteria did I use 3 years ago?
And I guess that might be another forward-looking mention too, is, feel free to narrate and add to your description to the degree that, space permits and the character limits there. But the naming of comparison groups, I think, is often can be very inviting to people. And, being other people at your institution, because remember, those are going to be above your column labels on your reports. So you'll want to make sure that these are accessible, and that then your narrative, where Rick's showing here, where you just get to describe what constitutes, why is this group important, who constitutes that group. You'll want to keep that for record keeping later, so someone can replicate it if you're not the one making these choices in a future administration. And I think you also want to do it to be transparent to people who you invite to weigh in on your comparison groups or to use your results. You'll want to make sure that you can be clear about who's in this grouping. Yeah, I think about all of these actions as really about increasing people's sense of ownership and value in their results. So customizing can really help bring additional value to data, make it more meaningful to people, help people see that maybe they aren't performing to the degree that they thought the institution was, which is often a good, self-reflection. So I encourage you to maximize the opportunity here and to really opt in for as many comparison group variations as you can. Again, we're here. I know it can be overwhelming to see all of this, and with the new Carnegie, it adds another wrinkle, but we really encourage you to make good use of it. So thank you for being with us today and for sharing some of your ideas. And Shannon and Jessica, thank you again for sharing your specific examples, and for everybody else. Yeah, we'll be available, waiting for your call to talk about customization. We hope to see some people at AIR this year. If you want to share your story, we'll be able to talk a little bit about it there. If you're going to AIR Forum in DC this year, wonderful. If not, please reach out. Thank you, Rick and Bob and Ryan and everybody else behind the scenes.
Jillian.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Okay, we'll sign off and give you back a minute.